All right. So, as you know, for quite a while now, we've been thinking together about technology and not about the technical details of technology, but about what technology is doing to us, to our social relations, and to our politics. And today is the day that I would like to bring these lectures to a close. And I'm going to try to do that by covering a fair bit of territory, starting where we left off and then trying to think through some regulations, some paths for reform in an age of digital and surveillance capitalism, a way that allows us to reclaim the digital commons, the public sphere, the media system, the knowledge system that it supports as a collective property, which has been increasingly privatized and driven by for-profit considerations. And as you will remember, we've been dealing with the work of Shoshana Zuboff, her mammoth study, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. And very quickly, as you are probably familiar with at this point, she suggests that Google in particular invented a new mode of generating profit. And that new mode of generating profit involves not just using the data that they capture to refine their own search engine, but taking the data that might not be relevant to refining their search engine, but which nevertheless we leave as we do our searches or navigate the web, or increasingly because our devices are implanted with programs to surveil us, so-called cookies, that they are able to capture a great deal of data beyond what they would need to just hone and refine their search engine. And they have used that surplus data to generate new products, and in particular, what they would call prediction products that predict how we're going to behave, what we might buy, what we might do if you give us a little nudge, suggest to us on Saturday afternoon with an advertisement, some sort of push messaging that it would be a nice day to go to that restaurant down the street or to shop for that handbag that you've been thinking about for a while. They have determined that if they can get enough information about us, they can be very effective in manipulating our behavior via advertisements, pushes, etc. And that this generates a great deal of revenue for them. And this helps us to kind of solve the mystery of how it is that companies that don't sell anything, Google and Facebook to take the chief examples, can nevertheless be among the most profitable and highly valued companies in the world today. It's because they're doing this, which Shoshana Zuboff refers to as surveillance capitalism. Now, she also suggests that this business model, in the climate of for-profit competitive capitalism, has its own internal dynamic. And that dynamic is to try to gather data about and eventually be able to predict and manipulate more and more aspects of the self. And so it starts with trying to do that with online behavior, but very quickly it comes out into the physical world. And here we're talking about the Internet of Things, right? The fact that our cars, our televisions, our refrigerators, our washing machines are wired, as are the devices we wear on our wrists, right, which collect data about our bodies. And this means that increasingly our body and self are being both monitored and potentially manipulated, and that there's no limit to this dynamic, as in terms of the intrinsic pressure of a market economy to generate competition to do this more effectively, more efficiently at larger scales, we should expect, in fact, we would be fools not to predict that this will continue to penetrate more and more aspects of life and self and become more and more sophisticated as time goes by. And you add to that the fact that the companies doing this have at their disposal the most powerful computational technology in the world today, and that technology has powers to detect patterns, to analyze data, to handle volume in a way that far exceeds the capacity of the human mind. And so in a sense, it's often very hard for us to even wrap our heads around how much data is being collected, how it's being analyzed, and what kind of power that might generate. And so Zuboff, in describing this and the new frontiers of surveillance capitalism, points us to, as I've already mentioned, the Internet of Things and ubiquitous computing. And I'll speak in a moment about wearable technology, but we're already in the era of wearable technology. And so, right, remember that this little thing here is much better described not as a phone so much as a handheld computer. And as you are no doubt aware, many of us will not go anywhere without it. Many of us now wear little armbands on our upper arm to keep them on our arms when we're working out, right? They sleep with the phone under their pillow, etc., right? And so this is a world of ubiquitous computing, and to the degree that these devices are tracking us, then we are more and more monitored. Now, the next, I think, big frontier in this kind of computing is what Zuboff refers to as effective or emotional computing. And so the idea here is to try to monitor your emotional response to, and then you can pick the stimulus, whether it would be uh, something in the internet, something in your immediate environment, something that you have just done. And please note, I've mentioned this before, right? Google bought Fitbit, right? And I'm sorry if you don't know what Fitbit is, but Fitbit is a health monitoring device and application, right? And so some of us are familiar with pedometers, right? They measure how many steps we take. This is the next frontier in that kind of technology. This doesn't just measure how many steps you take, it measures what your heartbeat is, what your volume of oxygen is that you're taking as you undertake fitness. And increasingly, especially in light of the global pandemic, many of us are walking to get our fitness, and many of us are trying to get 10,000 steps a day. And many of us are therefore turning to these devices. But as we turn to these devices, we are also sharing with their manufacturers. And the most popular of these devices is the Fitbit, and Fitbit is now owned by Google. And we're sharing with them all kinds of physiological data, which may give them greater understanding of how we are responding emotionally to various situations. And so the idea here is not just to predict your behavior, but to be able to trigger appropriate emotional responses, and in so doing, to then have very effective tools for pushing human behavior in specific directions. The other, I think, really important thing to note here, and we're going to talk a lot more about this today, is that increasingly the decision making in all kinds of computer applications and the things we use to structure all kinds of activities, from navigating to banking to communicating to monitoring our fitness, those decisions are made by algorithms. That is to say, by computer programs themselves. And they occur relatively automatically and in ways that we cannot understand, and at points perhaps not even control. And so I'll just mention this to you briefly, and we'll go into it a little bit more. When it comes to the sharing of information and news on Facebook, and remember, most Americans now get their news primarily from social media, and the number one social media app is Facebook. So this is the ABC News of the 21st century, the most influential source of broadly available information about what's happening in our society or the world. Um, the determination of what kind of news you're going to get, what kind of information you're going to get on your Facebook news feed, and that's just what you see when you open Facebook, that is determined by an algorithm. And the algorithm is designed to keep people on Facebook and coming back to Facebook and engaged with Facebook, to treat Facebook as a primary social outlet, right? And the algorithm is in a sense engineered to run experiments, and Facebook is doing behavioral experiments all the time. If we prioritize this or that piece of information, this or that cute photograph, this or that announcement from this person's friend, how long will they stay on the application? How long until they come back for their next hit? And the result is often that things that rise to the top in terms of their pull on our attention are what get prioritized, irrespective of their quality, of their value, of their veracity, right? And so one of the things then to know is that Facebook has a, quote, break glass protocol, which is to say, if they think that things are going really wrong, either on their platform or in the world in ways that their platform is influencing, they can shut their algorithm down and modify it to prioritize putting more salutary, more reliable, more truthful, more calming content into your newsfeed. And Facebook has done this twice recently. In the immediate aftermath of the election, November of last year, and in the immediate aftermath of the invasion of the Capitol in January of this year. And what's interesting to see is that they do this for a very short period of time. They do this maybe for 5 days or a week, and then they resume the normal algorithm. And that algorithm then starts again determining what we're going to see, not on the basis of whether it's healthy or helpful, good for us, good for our understanding of the world, good for democracy, but on the basis of whether it's good for Facebook, where what's good for Facebook is understood as what keeps our eyes on the screen, right? And so when I say decision making is outsourced to informationally empowered algorithms, right? This is in a sense the black box, because none of us understand how these algorithms actually work. I shouldn't say none of us. There are computer engineers, software designers, etc., who work for the companies and design the algorithms. Many of them are in fact surprised by what their algorithms do. We're going to talk in a little bit about some of the racism that we find in algorithmic decision making, which is just kind of replicating our racism, but perhaps even amplifying it as well. But that all that to say, right? We don't know what the algorithms are or how they work, but we do know that they determine much of the content that we receive from our media these days, the way in which it operates, the way in which it treats us, and that then means, in a sense, that human decision making is bypassed by much of the online social media world. Another new frontier, and again, I've referred to this already, the idea of behavioral manipulation and the soft power of enhanced decision making, right? And so, what word were you looking for? Well, Google will supply it for you in your search engine or in your Gmail account. Where is it that you want it to go? Well, your GPS technology will make some suggestions for you. What is it that you want to buy? Well, your various advertisements and search engines will also make suggestions for you as well, right? And what music do you want to listen to, right? What news should you be reading? All of this is slowly but surely being directed by the computational devices that we use, by the platforms that they run. And this is becoming more and more aggressive, more and more sophisticated as well. And then the final piece of this is wearable technology. And here I'm going to point to Alex Pentland, a MIT professor, one of the most influential people in the field of technology design today, and his ambition that basically everyone wear technology. And that could be just carrying your phone with you, but it could also be having computing built into your glasses, right? So that you're constantly seeing information, and your applications and computing devices are constantly seeing whatever you're seeing, or into your clothes, worn on your wrist as a watch, worn in your shirt so that it can monitor your heart rate very effectively, etc. Right? That this appears to be the future of technology, more and more integration of it into our ordinary objects that accompany us everywhere, such as our clothes, or maybe even implanted in our bodies. And his ambition, Alex Pentland, who is kind of a prophet, a visionary in this field, is that we all should have sociometers. That is to say, things that monitor the kinds of social interactions we're engaged in. Are we talking? Who are we talking to? What are we talking about? How is that affecting us emotionally? And that if the new wearable technology is equipped with sociometers, we should ultimately be able to predict human social interaction with something approaching the precision in which physics predicts the interaction of physical bodies, or chemistry predicts the interaction of chemical compounds, right? And so this is literally the title of his probably most influential book, Social Physics, that this is the future of social computing. And again, right, if we're thinking about the new frontiers, we are not far away from a world in which everybody is wearing technology, and that technology is equipped with detection devices designed to understand all of the details of human behavior. And then you feed that into the algorithms, the artificial intelligence, the computational power that they contain. And very quickly, you're on your way to a world in which, as Alex Pentland suggests, 90% of human behavior can be predicted in advance with sufficient data. And so this is not far away. This is, right, to my mind, affective or emotional computing and wearable technology with sociometers may be the most alarming of the new frontiers, but this is stuff that is already in the pipeline and we need to be concerned about. So I now want to start transitioning into a more strongly evaluative perspective to begin thinking about if we're going to think about regulating, criticizing, controlling this technology, what are the values that we need to be invoking? And I will just point out to you, I did mute everyone a few minutes ago because there was some background noise, probably you heard. But whenever you want to say anything, please just hold down your space bar. You can put it in the chat box. I'll see that too. I can't see your faces right now to know whether or not you're trying to ask a question. So please just interject whenever you have something to say. So one of the things that we should be concerned about, and I'm going to take privacy as an example, is that if these new frontiers proceed, if technology goes where it will without our effort to control it, that pretty soon central values are going to be transformed, perhaps beyond recognition. And so I'll start with the idea of privacy, and I want to return to the kind of core values of privacy. And I'll start with the idea that privacy shelters a sphere of intimacy. And the value of intimacy, this is something actually that has been the subject of recent histories, and the way in which modern society in particular came to value intimacy much more, has to do with the ability to try to disclose central aspects of oneself with confidence, with risk, but also with an attitude of shared exploration, yourself and the other, right? And so there's all kinds of things that you wouldn't say if you were on a microphone in front of a whole large group of people, many of whom you didn't know at all, that you absolutely would say and want to say to your significant others, to your life partner, to your parents, to your children, to your best friend. And it allows us to unfold aspects of ourselves, to engage in conversations that generate critical feedback about decisions we're making, thoughts we're having, moods and attitudes that inform our sense of self and well-being. All of that seems to require that we not share what it is we choose to share with our significant others with everyone else at the same time, right? And it's part of when I'm thinking here in particular of Hannah Arendt and her critique of totalitarianism, and her argument that one of the most pernicious things that the Nazi regime did was to encourage children to report on their parents to Nazi party authorities, right? And at that point, if you can't trust what you say in the privacy of your own home with nobody present but your children, you can't say anything revealing with confidence. And so that's one central aspect of the value of privacy. A second aspect of the value of privacy has to do with protecting a sphere of autonomy. And here the idea is that there's certain decisions that should be made by me in the depths of my conscience, or thinking through what I value most or what matters most to me, right? What religion do I actually affirm, or do I not affirm any religion? What are the central goals in my life, and how am I going to balance them, assuming there are going to be trade-offs between them, that not all good things go together, right? And that one thing about a sphere of privacy is that it says these are things that are between you and your conscience, between you and your understanding of yourself. You make your decisions and then you choose to reveal them to who you choose to reveal them. You bear responsibility for the choices you have made, but you have a sphere in which you get to direct your own life and lead it from the inside. And again, if we are constantly surveilled, if the information that we gather in order to make those decisions, if the tentative steps we take before we fully made up our mind become part of the digital breadcrumbs that are being swept up by all of these platforms and then used to steer and manipulate us, our autonomy is under assault, right? And privacy is no longer being respected. The final thing I would point out here, and I think this is important, which is that there has been a long-term historical association between privacy and the capitalist market economy. People like me who are not entirely fans of the capitalist market economy sometimes are a little skeptical about claims to privacy if they extend to being autonomy over private property, right? That might be exaggerating or distorting the value of privacy a bit, but there seems to be little doubt that historically capitalism has protected the autonomy of the owner of resources and generated kinds of wealth that have allowed people to erect more resilient and robust spheres of privacy. And one of the things that I think is quite striking about Shoshana Zuboff's analysis of surveillance capitalism is that it does now appear that the historical coalition, the correlation between privacy and the market economy may have been contingent and may be being superseded by a new phase of accumulation of profit that actually makes capitalism not protect but attack privacy, autonomy, intimacy, the capacity to make our own decisions. So one of the things I think should be clear at this point is that so much of the digital media that we use today is available to us on the basis of a kind of Faustian bargain. We surrender our privacy in exchange for the free provision of the platforms that are given to us and the tremendous power that they contain to allow us to do things we like doing, right? But this is something that many of us are not sufficiently self-conscious about. The degree to which we give up that control, the degree to which our information is being captured. And one example would be cookies, right? This idea that every time you use a website, a social media platform, etc., you almost have to give permission. They will create ways of getting out of it, but they're very onerous and often not very effective. The research on this shows that many times people try to opt out of data collection and it just doesn't work, right? That the program actually continues to track your data even after you've checked the box saying, I don't want you to do that, right? And the idea here is obviously that there's a solution, right? Which is you could just stop using these devices. You could get rid of the cell phone. You could not use the computer for anything but word processing. You could get rid of your internet connection. You could not buy anything that starts with the word smart. You could use only old cars. But as I've tried to point out to you, at some point, right, technology becomes integrated into our social infrastructure such that you can't really be a fully participating member of your society in your historical moment without using the technology that is ubiquitous and assumed, right? And so in a sense, to say that this is voluntary, that we all accept the bargain, seems to me to make a serious mistake. This is, in a sense, compulsory if you want to fully participate in your society at this historical moment. To not do so makes you an outsider, deprives you of opportunities, and we are susceptible to the social force of what everybody around us is doing. And so we'll talk more about this, but I think it's an abuse of the notion of contracting or freely consenting to suggest that because we push a button once, we have consented to this complete surrender of our privacy. So we've really already talked about the idea that data is being continuously extracted. Ubiquitous computing allows for more and more of this. I'm going to give you a single example, and some of you may be aware of this already. Google has features in its mapping program that allow you to see the visual photographic representation of the surroundings of the place you're going to. And there are lots of reasons that this might be handy. If you want to actually not just see an X on a street, but recognize in advance the building you're going to, it's a nice feature to be able to use Street View, as Google calls it. Or if there's a place you went to 20 years ago, something really important in your life happened and you'd like to revisit that place, but you can't afford to go back there, Street View lets you, in a sense, recreate the experience of being in that place again. So it's got its value. There's worry about the invasion of privacy here, which is to say Google, to get this, and you've probably seen this, drives vehicles around with mounted cameras and just takes pictures of everything around it. And there are ways to opt out of it. But again, it's difficult. But I think much more importantly is that for a long time, when Google was gathering these images, they also were gathering information about the network technology in every house they drove past, which, as it turns out, is almost every house in the United States and Europe and large swaths of Asia as well. And they were doing it without consent, without permission, without acknowledging it. At first they said it was an accident, and then their internal review suggested actually it was the design of the team that was in charge of Street Views to try to capture this information to get even more information on us. And so this is just, again, to underline Zuboff's central conclusion, which is if capturing our data, analyzing it, then packaging it into prediction products and selling it is the way in which money is made by a whole large and highly profitable sector of our economy right now, there is a race to see how much data can be captured. And when that conflicts with privacy, with ethics, with law, well, often the demand for data is going to get the better of the people who control the technology that allows them to gather it. And so there are lots of other examples with this. Facebook's experimentation with behavioral modification, which is ongoing, but trying to determine whether you see good news or bad news, for instance, and then whether you like or dislike other posts. I shouldn't say dislike, there's not a dislike option on Facebook, but whether you like or just don't like things. So right, these are large-scale experiments done on hundreds of millions of people without their consent or knowledge to affect their mood in order to affect their behavior. Similarly, you may remember, in a sense I kind of hope you don't, that there was this craze a few years ago, Pokemon Go, right? Where you had an app on your phone and it told you if you go to this place, you will capture this or that Pokemon and get this many points. And millions of people were playing it. What I think many of us didn't realize is that this was being used on the one hand to gather data about our daily routines. Where are we at this time when we play that game? But it was also being used to push and nudge us, to get us to go to places where the designers of that application thought we might be more likely to buy something. And if we bought something, guess what? They derived further revenue. And I now just want to continue for a moment with I think, central and very important example. Some of you may be aware that in China right now, there is something that is called a social credit score. And so, right, this is akin to a financial credit score in the sense that it depends on your behavior over time. But as opposed to whether or not you've paid down your debts, how long you've had your credit cards for, are up to date with your mortgage, etc., this is, did you go to this or that political rally? How frequently do you vote? Do you take out your trash on a regular basis? I'm, to be honest with you, not sure about all the details. I'm not sure anybody is sure about all the details of what goes into the Chinese social credit score, but it does seem to be a new and disturbing use of the data that is collected. And what the Chinese use the social credit score for is not to determine what kind of financial credit you can get, but whether or not you get a promotion at work, whether or not you can live in this more desirable neighborhood, whether or not your child will go to the school that they want to go to, right? So it's a very effective mechanism of social coercion. And I would just point out to you that something similar is happening in the United States. This is increasingly popular. There are firms that collect data on you, and it's from the incredibly trivial, how many exclamation marks do you use in your social media posts, to the much more pernicious, right? What kinds of political views do you indicate you like when you are on social media, to try to predict for future employers or future landlords or future insurers, are you a good risk? Are you a good bet? Should we hire this person? So again, right? Algorithmic decision making displacing human judgment. People are now being evaluated on the basis of a score that the people who see that score don't even know how it was generated. But nevertheless, if it turns out that using lots of exclamation points is correlated with having loud parties that might disturb your neighbors in your apartment building, or driving fast, or leaving jobs repeatedly, then the fact that you've used a bunch of exclamation points on your social media posts might result in the fact that you don't get the job, the housing, the insurance that you are trying to get. And so this, again, I think will become all the more common as we move further down the path to ubiquitous data extraction, powerful analysis of it using artificial intelligence. I'm going to just add one more point here, and that has to do with the thingness of things, right? And we're used to treating our things as non-sentient, as not having sensation. Right. Well, it turns out that more and the more things around us, the things that we've built as we try to humanize our world, are thinking, right, are monitoring and reporting on us. And I do think that there's a sense in which the kind of taken for grantedness of the utility of the built world is at risk in a world in which our objects don't just do what we want them to do, but while they do it, they also collect data about us, data which can potentially be used against us. All right, let me talk about let me not concentrate here, given the limits of time. I really do want to try to complete this lecture today. I'm going to just mention one more aspect of all of this, and I'm going to bring in a couple additional authors whose work I'm just really briefly going to refer you to, and so Virginia Eubanks and Sophia Emoja Noble are two, I think, very interesting, very important scholars looking at the social effects of technology use with an eye in particular to social hierarchy and inequality. And Eubanks has written this book, Automating Inequality, How High-Tech Tools Profile, Police, and Punish the Poor.
David?
Yes.
Do you realize that we've been staring at the surveillance capitalism slide this whole time?
What?
The only slide that I've seen is a surveillance capitalism.
Not for me.
No, we're not.
Really? Huh. Okay.
I've come out of the screen share now. I'm going to go back into the screen share. And who is that? Is that Bob? Who was that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought I recognized your voice. So look, when I go back in, let's see if your slides, you're now seeing my face, right?
True.
Okay, so now I'm going back in. Something must have froze, and I got really worried there that it was everyone. I'm sorry that it was you, Bob, but obviously it's better that it's just one person than it's everyone. So I won't say it's better that it's you, Bob. Now, what are you seeing?
Just you in the corner, and David Perez has started screen sharing. A black screen, and it says that you've started it, but nothing on it.
Can I ask, is everybody else seeing Eubanks and Noble and the titles of the covers of their books?
Yes.
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 So
Yes.
I don't know what's gone wrong.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I got it. and Bob, two possibilities for you. One would be to just bear with it, and I'm sorry. The other would be to shut down Zoom and get back in and see if when it reloads, it loads better. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I'm showing slides and it seems like everybody else is actually seeing them.
Good.
All right. Good luck. Sorry. So I was starting to say Eubanks is looking at, for instance, welfare reform and the way in which some states are now tracking where. Well, I guess the first thing we've got to say is now when you receive food or other kinds of support, it actually comes on a credit card and a limited value credit card, and they're tracking where it's being used. And they're using various techniques of surveillance to try to determine whether what you posted on social media makes you more likely to be a criminal suspect, and then profiling you. And what the work of Eubanks shows is that the poor, racial minorities, people who live in disadvantaged areas are much more susceptible to these new digital forms of surveillance, law enforcement, social coercion, and control. And again, given what we know about the history of policing the poor in the United States, we shouldn't be surprised. But again, it does point out to us the way in which this technology, when it's unregulated, goes where it wants to go, and we follow it there. Similarly, Sophia Emoja Noble's work she points out, right, a Google search. If you put in "why are black women so," and by the way, Google has fixed this, but it used to suggest search terms for you: angry, loud, mean, attractive, lazy, annoying. You get the idea, right? And Noble starts her book by pointing out she's partially African American, and she had her nieces come over at some point, and she Googled the term "black girls," thinking that she would get results that would tell her good things to do with young black girls. And instead, any guesses on what she got? A whole bunch of porn sites for people who like seeing black girls, right? And so the idea here is that although so far I have not really focused on the interaction of digital technology and existing axes of inequality, there's every reason to believe that this technology will likely worsen existing inequality. The problem, I think the central problem, and Frank Pasquale has done really interesting work on this, he's a law scholar, is that the way in which algorithms work is completely opaque to everyone who is not on the inside of one of these corporations. And by the way, if you're on the inside of one of these corporations and you leave, you have signed almost invariably a non-disclosure agreement, so you can't say. And these are all examples. I'm not going to go through them, but the way in which now these algorithms are reinforcing our conscious and unconscious biases and are likely to, in fact, exacerbate inequality as opposed to in any way ameliorating it. So, what can we do? And I'm going to tick through a kind of laundry list of possible reforms. Before I do that, I just want to kind of synthesize what we've covered now over quite a long time by giving you the list of possible things that unregulated, unaccountable, unimaginably powerful digital computing threaten. Right? And we've talked about privacy and autonomy today. We should talk more about happiness, to be honest. But one of the central findings of the work of people like Sherry Turkle is that the more people use social media, the more they report that at the end of the day, they feel less fulfilled. They feel cravings. They feel loneliness. They feel insecurities. And in a sense, this is part of the way in which the technology is engineered, because those cravings lead you back to the technology for most people. By the way, and I'm just going to mention this very briefly. I'm sorry, I should have created a slide for it. But if you know someone in this category, and I know I've mentioned this book to you before, but I really like Jenny Odell's How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy. And so if you know somebody whose happiness you think is being impaired by technology use, I would recommend that as a good first step. So these three are primarily personal and psychological. We now get into social relations, right? This is distorting our empathy, is segregating us into increasingly insular tribes where we have more and more in-group, out-group kind of hostility, right? And so our social relations are deteriorating in part because of what this technology is doing to us. Communication and conversations, right? More and more of our communication occurs through, quote, DM, digital messaging, right? And the result is that we spend less and less time in face-to-face conversation. We also spend a lot less time reading printed pages, and we're much more susceptible to disinformation, propaganda, confusion in the world of social media. Our knowledge system is breaking down. And finally, it's hard to imagine democracy working very well when we are polarized and tribalized, misinformed, susceptible to propaganda, no longer as autonomous as the institutions that structure our politics assume we are. And so what do we do? And here I'm going to go through a quick list because I think in a sense the reforms are there. And I will, if you want to, during questions, speak a little bit more about this. But the issue is not, can we reform, right? In the sense of, do we know what to do? The issue really is, do we have the will to reform? And here I want to point out that one of, I think, the more interesting chapters in Zuboff's book contains a long digression on totalitarianism and how many people in the first half of the 20th century failed to understand what fascism, what totalitarianism were, how they operated, how dangerous and destructive they were as forms of reorganizing political communities. And that part of what prevented us from fully understanding them is that they were so novel and in so many ways violated such long-standing norms, understandings, and principles, right? And the result was that we spent a long time coming up to speed before we fully understood the threat that totalitarianism represented, both to those who inhabited regimes structured in this way and to everybody else in the surrounding world. And Zuboff suggests that we're in a parallel situation right now. This technology is advancing rapidly. It's having all kinds of reverberating social effects. And yet we are very slow in coming to grips with it. So in a sense, probably the most important avenue for reform is consciousness raising, is saying, wait a sec, things are changing rapidly. And if we don't do something, there is a logic, there is a dynamic to this. It's going in a direction, and we should not be happy or comfortable with the direction that it's moving in. If we decide that we want to regulate it, then we need to start with a couple areas of law that really don't work for this new technology. One of them is contract law. And I've referred to the click and cover contract, right? You click a button, almost everybody who clicks those buttons doesn't read even a tiny little bit of the verbiage that describes what you're consenting to when you click that button. And not only that, those long, ornate contracts contain multiple hyperlinks, right? That is to say, they connect to the service contracts of other firms that when you sign up for this application, your data is also being shared with them. And so people estimate that if you really carefully read the contracts for many of the sites and applications that people regularly visit, you could spend a week or more trying to figure out what you were actually consenting to. In that scenario, this is not a meaningful contract. This is not a meaningful way of securing the consent of the people who find this technology irresistible, not only because it's attractive and fun, but because the social world we live in assumes that you have access to it. And so contract law needs to be sharpened, it needs to be bolstered, it needs to be updated in order to take into account what's happening today, and to prevent technology companies from overwhelming us with dense verbiage, to make them clarify their terms, and frankly, to make them not able to ask us to consent to stuff that we should never be asked to consent to in exchange for using their services. Similarly, antitrust law needs to be reimagined. And Tim Wu, who I've spoken with you about earlier, has a very good book out on this called The Curse of Bigness, quoting Brandeis actually on that idea. And suggesting that part of the problem is that digital attention merchants don't really sell us things. And so the problem with their monopolies, with Google's monopoly, is not that they're able to manipulate prices, but it's that the level of social power that they acquire by monopolizing a field like searching the internet, and then all of the data it generates, gives them tremendous leverage and power over us. And so again, antitrust law needs to be updated and brought into the 21st century, not to mention generally reinvigorated. Third idea is to return to this notion of public media and extend it to the age of social media. And some of you may remember, I spoke with you a while back about Robert McChesney. Rich Media, Poor Democracy is probably his best known book. And in one of his books, McChesney points out that there's a very clear correlation between the amount of money a society spends on its public media and the quality of its overall media environment and the overall quality of its democracy. This is because if you have well-funded public media, not only do many people turn to them to get their news and entertainment, but it also sets a high standard for private media. People expect more and better from the media system in general. And we need to start thinking about social media as requiring a public domain within this world of social media as well. Final idea, and John Campbell called my attention to an article in the most recent issue of The Atlantic by Anne Applebaum, putting out the fire in our digital dumpster. And one of the things that article points out, and this is stuff you could find in many other places, there are lots of ideas for how to regulate the internet, social media, digital media. The issue is not doing it. The issue is generating the will to do it. And many of these ideas, and I think regulating algorithmic design is perhaps the single most important, rely on new models of regulation in which, as opposed to simply having the government have a body of experts that tells us what can and can't be done, legislative centralization of the design of regulations, the internet is too sprawling, too fast moving, the use of computational technology too powerful to really be regulated in the way in which we regulated cigarettes or automobiles. That as opposed to that, what we need, and it goes hand in hand with generating public social media, is opportunities for individuals who have the capacity to share with the rest of us alternative designs. And again, all of this goes together. Part of what would have to happen to popularize less polarizing and more informative forms of social media is that we would probably have to break up the monopolies of Facebook and Google, etc. Right? And then we would have to give people the tools and the power to do this. But there are people already at work on this digital commons project. The issue is not that it can't be done. The issue is that we need to generate the collective will to do it. I will stop there. I'm happy to take whatever questions you might have. Who wants to start us out today? Bob, go ahead.
I hesitate to do this because it's simply going to show off my ignorance, but I just submitted my taxes using TurboTax.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end, they said, okay, you're going to get this refund. How do you want to get it? We can have the government send you a check, or you can sign up with this program where they'll give you an extra $50, and it turns out what they send me is a debit card, which allows them to track everything that I use it for. And I was very uncomfortable going through the whole thing of everything that they were asking me before they came up with this. But I wasn't smart enough to say, forget this. This is stupid. I'm being manipulated here.
Yeah, and so this is absolutely typical, right? $50. That's a nice little bonus, right? And we all use credit cards, and our credit cards all create data streams when we use them, right? And so I'm not sure, frankly, how much more information you gave over to them, but I would just point out to you, yes, you know, one of the things you might consider doing is like a 1-minute pause before you hit any button that says you're going to get this in exchange for that, right? And just think to yourself, okay, so what are they getting from me, right? What does that $50 purchase for them? And am I comfortable with it? Or do I know enough to know whether I should accept the bargain, right? And that might lead you to forego some of these sometimes quite enticing opportunities once you think about it a little bit.
Move up.
Okay.
So do you have a hotline that we can get a hold of you and say, David, tell me whether I'm getting screwed here?
Sure, I'll give out my cell number at the end.
All right, good.
Anybody else? No? Okay. Well,
before you go, this is Liz.
Hi,
I wanted you to know, I wanted everybody to know, I'm not on video, I'm just on audio. But in this week's New York Times book review, there is our friend Sherry Turkle. She's got her memoir, The Empathy Diaries, reviewed, and about the erosion of human feeling in our digital age. So I thought maybe you'd want to know that.
and that's this week, so that's literally sitting on my desk right now, huh?
Yeah, I've got it online because I get the book review online, and so I figure it'll be in the print edition as well. So
I could run to the other room and take a look, but I'm going to trust that it must be there. Thank you for calling that to our attention, Liz. Nice as always to hear your voice.
Always good to hear yours too. Thanks.
Thank you. And is there anybody else with a question or a thought for today?
Yeah, I have a thought. I think when you're talking about our age group, there definitely is inequality. There are the people who can do Zoom and the people who can't do Zoom, the people who don't quake at the idea of doing Zoom. But for the people who do Zoom during this pandemic, it's been a lifesaver. And I think, looking at different age groups and how they use these things might give a kind of different perspective. I don't think we're as concerned about privacy. Maybe some people are, I'm not, but I think the advantages of being able to communicate when their opportunities for communication were so limited were really substantial.
And thank you for that, Ruth. And I'll just note another aspect of this, right? So Zoom allows people who are isolated to overcome some of their isolation. Zoom and similar platforms have allowed people who, for various health reasons, aren't able to go to work in person, or might be able to, but would do so at considerable risk, not only to themselves, but of spreading a destructive virus during a global pandemic, to stay home, right? And so on the one hand, clearly from the public health point of view, that's very beneficial. And you're absolutely right. There are a whole bunch of people also who either aren't in lines of work that allow them to do what they do without coming to work, or who don't have access to the technology. And so existing inequalities are amplified by this technology. And on the other hand, maybe the society as a whole is benefiting from this technology, especially the people who can take advantage of it, right? And so I, probably my disposition as a social analyst is to look for the danger, to look for the things that are troubling and that we should be aware of, so that we can take a little bit more political control over them. But that doesn't mean that we have to be blind to some of the genuine advantages they have. And I did not by any means, I'm not a digital Neanderthal. I'm not somebody who says we should tear it all down and just go back to books and paper. Having said that, I do think we need to be cautious. That the tremendous advantages also come at real costs. And one of the reasons I like Zuboff is because she has a kind of paranoid sensibility. Right. And so that sensibility helps you to see things that you might not see if you're just humming along, not looking for the danger. But having said that, it can also be exaggerated. And so I take the point for sure. And anybody else? All right, everybody. Have good afternoons and good weeks.
David, it's Doris.
Go ahead, Doris. I can't see you, but I can hear you. Yeah.
I just want to say I had a very interesting experience, and it was I had to make an international call, and I wasn't able to. I didn't know how to do it, and so I called up Sonic, which is who is our provider, and they gave me another number. And I didn't realize that it was a totally different organization. Well, in the end, this organization helped me to connect me to my call. But in the meantime, I didn't realize that it was a contract, and that once they helped me, that thereafter I would be paying $50 a month for a year to receive their services. All I wanted was a help with a telephone call. Well, it's interesting because I didn't realize until the third month that I was being charged $50 a month by this company. So I called the company up and I said, listen, I didn't sign up for this service. I just wanted that telephone number. Well, it's too bad you did do that. Well, it's interesting. I called up my Visa company, which was Wells Fargo, and they were able to take off the charges.
Good.
Yeah. I mean, you really have to read everything and hope that you can get help. But if you don't, if you don't fight for that, then you won't get it, which is what you were saying, that you have to be aware and be able to communicate your your situation. I was surprised that they gave me my refund, but they did.
So,
Is that amazing?
so let me tell you my version of the story. I recently bought something online. I got the best price by far from this one company. I was actually a little suspicious because the price was so much better than what everybody else had. And so I was watching my credit card to make sure that no bad charges came through. And sure enough, and the thing I bought was like $600. So I got another charge for $20. Not that big a deal in the in the realm, but nevertheless, I called the company and said, wait a sec, I didn't authorize this additional charge. Here's the funny thing. The person who picked up the phone when I hit customer service was the CEO of the company. Yeah. And he said, look, I'm doing customer service during COVID. I don't have patience for this. I'll refund your $20 right now. I don't think we charged you it. I think it's your credit card company made a mistake. I don't care. Here's your, so yeah, you have to be alert. You have to have a slightly suspicious, slightly paranoid way of looking at these kinds of things, especially with online commerce. All right, everybody. Thank you. Take care. Look forward to seeing you next week. We'll be talking about climate change now that we're done with this lecture for a lecture or two. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, David.
You guys. Bye-bye.